Awesome. All right, everyone. Well, welcome to the latest installment of a casual stroll through Lord of the Rings Online. My name is Matt Elliott. I go by Scenario on the message boards, and I'm a senior world designer on Lord of the Rings, and have been doing this for um, over 15 years now. So today we're taking a tour through Moria. We finished off all of Eriador with the exception of Ettenmoors, which I wanted to hold off on that. But now we're in Moria. And then once we get through Moria, we'll return to our regular schedule of people voting on regions to explore. So those of you who are familiar with this channel and have been here before, thank you for coming by. Those of you that are unfamiliar, this is a world design focused stream. So we're going to take a look at the landscapes, the dungeons, the tunnels, everything to do with Moria from a world and level design perspective. As I am a world designer, I cannot answer questions about things like class balance, PvMP, the lag, engineering, any of that stuff. We're focusing purely on the landscape here. So if you have questions about Moria and its landscape, how we came about building it, questions about just level design in general, feel free to ask them, and I'll do my best to answer them for you. With that in mind, welcome to Durn's Threshold. This is kind of the first area post your epic story interactions. I'm not going to say too much in order to avoid spoilers, but you find yourselves here in Moria, the first hub in Moria. And Moria in general is a place that has changed a lot over the years, from when we originally created it. And there are honestly even versions of Moria that are even earlier versions of what you see here, and we'll take a look at some of those much later on. And it's huge. So this is an extra long stream as well. But so Moria has changed a lot over the years as we've gone through, revised the content, pardon me, and made changes as we go through. And I wouldn't be surprised if, as time progresses, we come back in and do additional further refinements. I know one of the things that I really want to do in Moria is go through and revamp travel, but it's a case of like, when do I have the time for it? As we let me see if there are any comments to address, and then I will start going through. Lyron says, "Thank you for doing the casual stroll through Moria. This is my favorite expansion." Well, I think we're all we were very excited to be able to get to Moria. Moria was one of those places when we first started working on Lord of the Rings. The idea of getting here always kind of felt very far away. When we first started working on the game, we never really expected that we would get this far. And now in hindsight, like looking at where we've been everywhere so far, like getting this far just kind of seemed a little short-sighted. Like, we've been to Mordor and back, and thinking that we would never get to Moria was just something that, like, we should have known we were going to get here. Little bit of trivia here too. These stairs here very specifically called out a specific number of stairs. So this POI this point of interest has the exact specific number of stairs that it's supposed to have. It was 130 something stairs, I think. That was one of the requirements for this piece that was being built. So as I was saying, like in talking about how Moria has changed over the years, these little side passages up here, the Threshold's north and south wings, used to be fairly substantial monster camps, and now they have changed a little bit to being more like social spaces. And I think the other side is actually closed off now, maybe. I'll have to run over there real quick to take a look at it. But this building Moria was something where we created brand new tech in order to support. Yeah, this is closed off now. There used to be a monster camp over here. We created brand new tech for Moria. We prototyped it in a couple of spaces beforehand. So in Foreshell there is a glacial tunnel that uses the dual height map tech, basically the ceiling height map tech that we use all over the place in Moria. Four Shell was kind of our test bed for that to make sure it worked, and it worked great. And we subsequently have like built the entirety of Moria using it. It was a little different and interesting, kind of learning a new way to sculpt height maps. We were so used to just doing ground floor level stuff that actually having to be like, okay, so what does a cave ceiling look like? We've built plenty of caves and whatnot before. I'm a little laggy right now. There we go. We've built plenty of caves and in dungeon spaces before, but it's a little bit different when you're sculpting it as opposed to placing rocks all over the place. So we had to like figure out how high was too high, how low was too low. We had to kind of relearn how to build a space and how to make the cameras work with it, and also learn how to embed assets in it to make it feel good. I think one of the things too that was a lot of fun in building this space is like the strategically placed pitfalls here and there and everywhere. Like how do we build things to like surprise players who may not be entirely paying attention to where they're going. We'll continue on our walkthrough here. So like I said, this is an extra long stream, longer than we normally do, just because the sheer size of Moria. I was doing my pre-stream research and whatnot, coming up with a list of locations to go visit, and the number of just even dungeon spaces is I don't think we had before and have since built built that many dungeons. It's kind of daunting to think about. And then the fact too that even after the launch of the expansion pack, a lot of content post expansion pack, post Mines of Moria launch, came back here to revisit. This is one of the new monster types that we introduced as part of Moria, the Grodbog, kind of the hive insects. Which I had a lot of fun with some of the new assets that we got as part of a lot of the new assets that we got as part of Gundabad to kind of help grow our ability to build Grodbog spaces was really just like exciting to work with. One of the things that we tried to play a lot of with in Moria was some verticality and a lot of like over under as we were building the space too. Like we don't have layered height maps, so we can't have like things stack on top of each other, and Moria is very like clearly described as levels stacked on top of levels stacked on top of levels. And since we don't really have the tech for that, our approach to kind of suggesting that is the further north you are in the map, you are considered to be at higher levels of Moria. And then the further south you go physically are the lower tiers of Moria. So this was our way of kind of indicating that change, that path, without having the tech to necessarily like specifically go layers on top of layers. So I will get a good view and then take a look at questions real quick. hang out here in Dolbenview for a few minutes and see what chat has to say. Alright, so Michael Krasinski says, first time coming Moria surely is one of the most memorable moments for me. And I think that's one of our main goals with Moria is to make it be a space that, like, when you first walk into it, it's something like you've never seen before. It was the most dwarfiest dungeon-iest thing that we could think to create at the time. I think we've improved upon that, both with the stuff that we did in the Grey Mountains and with the stuff that we did obviously with Gundabad. We kind of took the formula of Moria and tried to like push things a little bit further in terms of detail in both of those spaces. So Sindrogo says, speaking of travel, what made the decision to only allow rams and boars as mounts in Moria and Gundabad, with so many horse mounts available in the shop, but not as many for Moria and Gundabad? So the decision behind that was lore-driven, basically indicating, there was pieces in the lore, particularly as the Fellowship was approaching Moria, and how like Bill the Pony was just so terrified of being there. So the idea that horses in general would be too skittish, even hardened war horses would be too skittish to be in something as dark and foreboding as Moria. And then, knowing that, we then decided, okay, well, if we don't want to have horses in here because we're trying to honor the lore of the space, what can we do here? And then that kind of came to our sense of like, okay, well, maybe if we have pack animals that can be mounts, that might be a little less skittish in terms of animal types, we could have those as mounts in there. And I also think it's great for a little bit of mount diversity. I know not everyone agrees with, boars and with goats and with elks as mounts. I think having that kind of diversity of profile, diversity of silhouette is really, really helpful when you're like looking at things from a distance and you're getting a sense of player lineup. It helps make things feel more diverse and interesting than if you're all kind of riding the same mount. So welcome back. Sam Burke says that I had forgotten about this stream until I started reading on Twitter and I saw it start 5 minutes ago. Well, welcome, Sam. I'm doing this stream about once a month. There are some sometimes where I've taken a month off, but generally I've been trying to do this stream once a month. And typically I leave it up to the player community through the message boards to decide what we walk through next. But since Moria is kind of the gateway to basically everything else in the game after Eriador, I felt like it was important to just like go through this without putting the poll up. But I'm sure you'll all forgive me for that. So Captain Kieran says, what was the most difficult part of tackling Moria? Honestly, I think the most difficult part was wrapping our heads around the scale of what we wanted to produce and kind of reining ourselves in a little bit and figuring out what we needed to do from both a world design perspective, from a tech perspective, from an engine perspective, in order to make it work and to make it feel good and impressive. And walking around in it now, it is several years old at this point, and it doesn't quite feel as detailed and robust as it might have when it first came out, and especially if you compare it to some of our other spaces that are of a similar design. But at the time that it was made, and the tech that we produced, not just the dual height map tech for the ceiling, but also, as you can see here, the player keylight tech, which is a light source that follows your player around in darkened spaces sometimes. I think both of those were like pretty major advancements for us and things that we were really, really excited to develop for the game. So like I said, lots of over, under, ups and downs. Though, like a lot of the areas, we tried not to be too confusing in these spaces. We didn't have a lot of overlapping. There were a couple of pockets here and there where we'd have like small rooms like this one down here that would overlap. Let's see if I can make the jump. That would overlap. So I think this is a bug. There might be a key light in here, and since I already have a key light on me, it's unhappy. So yeah. One of the fun things too with Moria is there does sometimes feel like there's kind of two paths through it. You can go north or you can go south. And eventually, like, everyone kind of meets back up at the 21st Hall. So Michael Krasinski asks, were you also getting lost while building it? I think, we tried to make sure we knew where everyone was working. The tricky things with the tools sometimes is it was really easy, especially since it's so kind of clustered in, your in-tools camera perspective wasn't always the greatest. It could be a little tricky sometimes to kind of know exactly where you were because, your in-tools camera is like this, and you've got a wall here and a wall there, and it's a little hard to exactly know, like, where you are, what you're doing. I think, after a little bit of a learning curve, people, figured it out. We kind of got our cave feet, as it were, and were able to build pretty effectively. I think the biggest difference between a place like this and a normal, like, open world landscape is, regions like this, which are very heavily structured, require a lot more very specific hand-placed work to do. Whereas we do lean very heavily on things like our scene file system, our day files, kind of more procedural aspects to kind of move along the development process more quickly. But in here, we had to, basically everything had to be very precisely designed in order to, really, really work well. We had to make it feel like it was a city. And I think there are things that we've learned a lot of over the years that, that there are certainly some things that are very successful about Moria and others that, when you go and run through it, maybe don't feel quite as successful in selling it as a city. Like, I think, going through here, we oftentimes get bugs in our queues about, we build a town and then the buildings in the towns don't have doors. So often we found ourselves, if you run around in Moria, that's one of the things where I'm just kind of like running around it now retrospectively thinking like, oh wow, that, we're trying to make this feel like a city, but there's not a lot of things like, doors and, front yards for these buildings sorts of things. It's stuff like when I built Erebor, I was trying to keep in mind, like, okay, we want it to be a city. That means there are certain things that need to be in here in order to call it a city. And I think when we were building Moria, we were much more focused on, like, building the shape of it and didn't have as much focus, or maybe even necessarily the time, to build it like a city. Because that's a lot of detail work that that can eat up a schedule very, very quickly. So we'll take a pause here and go through some more questions. So Runloft asks, still blows my mind how big Moria is every time I'm in there. How long did it take from start to finish to complete? I think we spent about 1.5 years working on it. At the time that we were building it, we were also still doing, updates to the live game and trying to maintain that schedule. Branching methods for that were a little, like, zany, and but let's see where we are. Oh, we're at the Zurich Ziggle we're at Ziggle now. Cliffs of Xeric Ziggle. We'll go up here. Oh, there we go. So yeah, and our process for it started out with a lot of research. There was actually a great National Geographic documentary that was about cave systems, and that was like one of the things that we did at the start of working on Moria. Was we sat down as a group and decided, okay, let's watch this documentary and kind of use that as a way to inform ourselves as to like what natural cave systems look like, because we've built dungeons before, but we wanted to have a little bit more information about what it takes to build a cave, what it takes, what cave systems are, what the ecosystems within them are, what kind of biodiversity can exist within those sorts of things. Like that was something that was really important to us, and we put a lot of time into that. This was a fun POI to see built. Look at me getting all of my virtue XP. So let's see. So while I'm working my way out of Xeric Ziggle, I'll see about some more questions. So where do I go? I go this way. Let's see. So hi, Doomy1992 says, hi, question around the Middle Earth. Could you upgrade the texture files to make everything more modern graphics? I do that when I mod games. So when it comes to doing texture upgrades and whatnot, there's always the cost, the question of performance cost versus visual benefit to it. The bigger textures get, the more expensive they get for video cards, and the greater the possibility that it will not be performant for people. So there are times here and there where we have come across certain terrain textures, for example, that just are lower quality, and we want to update them. And we usually will at that point either replace them with something that's a little bit more modern, within our catalog. I know that question was being asked in regards to a very specific thing that I am not going to, nor am I at the liberty to talk about at this time. Also, as always, I talk a lot in this, and my throat gets a little scratchy, so if it's been a while since you've seen me last have a drink of water, please remind me to get a drink. Lyron1986 asks, was Dolbenview the first space to be made during development? So we typically start on one side of a map and kind of work our way over. So our first areas were the Great Delving. Great Delving and Silvertine Lodes were kind of the first spaces in Moria that we built. While those were getting their fine detail, we have people in roles that we call world artists. So they are kind of our more art-focused counterpart to world designers. So where world designers might be a bit more focused on things like gameplay, world artists are focused on bringing up the level of art for a region. So what was happening, typically what happened in Moria development was we have all of these different areas, and world designers would kind of get on the ground floor. We'd start blocking out, building out spaces, and we did that for the Great Delving and Silvertine Lodes, and then had a world artist come in, and they kind of went through, see what we built, and kind of tried to bring the fidelity up on the space a little bit with the ideas that we had in mind in terms of ceiling asset usages, lighting, like those sorts of things. And then once we kind of had those ideas kind of solidified and crystallized in those spaces, um, we could then take those as world designers and propagate them out to other parts of the world. Like, oh, okay, we know this kind of lighting works well for this kind of setting at these distances. This sort of fog works well here. It's a lot of experimentation that often our world artists do. Let's go through a couple more. So Lyron asks, is there technology you've developed since Moria that you would like to go back to Moria and implement that couldn't be at the time? Technology, I would say, I don't think there's anything specifically tech-wise. There are certainly best practices that we use now. Kind of the ways that we approached building places like Gundabad and whatnot, that it'd be nice to kind of go back to something like Moria and hit it with similar levels of detail and fidelity. But that's a lot of work considering how big Moria is. If we were ever to do that in the future, it might be something where we think about it in terms of, okay, we will go back and we will touch up a specific area that we feel is weakest. An area that needs the most support and help to modernize it, and then kind of go a little bit at a time through there in that way. Captain Kieran asks, did you have any troubles justifying why characters would enter Moria lore-wise, or did that story come pretty easily? Well, I think we couldn't do an expansion pack without for Moria without having justification for players to come in here, and I think that the story purposes behind it, like the idea being that we're not in here at the same time that the Fellowship came through here. We're in here after the Fellowship has come through and basically caused all of the ruckus that they so generously caused, and what the state of Moria that we're going through now is kind of the byproduct of their shenanigans previously. So I think us being in here post Fellowship was not as much of a narrative hurdle as it might seem to have been, especially considering the Iron Garrison storylines that happened through here. The Dwarves want to reclaim Moria. They want their city back, their massive city back. So I don't think it was too hard for us to make that justification. We built it, so clearly our licensors also felt that we justified it fairly well. So Sindrogo asks, maybe out of scope question, but with tweaking older areas, is there a plan to have more on-level or scaled content and missions for level cap players to revisit without playing up an alt? So I think part of the reason why we invested in the mission system and in the further adventures was as a way to... this is a dead end. It's over here, isn't it? We invested in those systems in order to find ways for players of all levels to engage with places that they either are too high level for or are too low level for. I think players being able to do the missions in the war effort of Elderslade, for example, was a great way for us to produce that content and put it out there, and for everyone to feel like they could participate in it, even if they didn't have a character that was quite high enough level for it. And similarly, further adventures, the further adventures of Bilbo Baggins and the recently just announced Further Adventures of Eladan and Elro here, are ways for people that might be at level cap to come back to, or reasons for people who are at level cap to come back to the regions that they've long since outgrown. And I think both of those concepts are concepts that are here to stay, and I think they're things that we will continue to support. There may not be support for them in every single new update that we do, but there's certainly times where we will introduce those things for players. So here we are in the lovely 21st Hall. This was actually kind of one of the, like, I don't know, one of the weirdest hubs from my perspective to build, just because it feels like we're in this very dangerous place, and it's like this sort of fortified little, surrounded by scaffolding space. At the time, I think it was probably one of the most popular quest hubs, just because of ease of access to so many different town services and whatnot. Like, services are king. If people can get access to every service they need, then why do they need to go anywhere else? Alright, before we start heading south out of the 21st Hall, let's take a look at some more questions. Yao asks, would it be possible now to have Moria on 3 different floors instead of 3 different fake floors? No, it would not. Because we don't have a good way of managing, kind of load for those spaces. Like, the number of assets that would be needed in a single land block, for example, to build each level would be effectively 3 land blocks worth of assets. And that has a weight and a cost on performance. It has a weight and a cost on the server. So, like, stacking everything like that wouldn't be ideal. There's also the issue of maps. Our maps don't handle overlapping things graciously. Like, I have seen a ton of feedback regarding Deepsgrave in Gundabad about how all of the overlapping levels there can make it difficult to explore and engage with the content, because it's hard to know where exactly you are in the elevation of things. I'm sorry, I'm between some allergies, and we had people come and spray for mosquitoes and whatnot. So between allergies and citronella, I'm a little sneezy today. But so yeah, the even if the cost of asset loading wasn't high, the mapping solutions just wouldn't be there, and we would have to come up with a new method and a new way for that, which is not an insignificant amount of work. Highway Cavalier asks, who is your favorite Moria NPC? I mean, I have to be completely honest. I don't have any specific NPCs in Moria that would immediately pop to mind as a favorite of mine. There are a ton of NPCs in Moria, and there are some big names, there are some lesser names. Like, there is a lot going on in this region, and my characters are less the actual NPCs that you interact with, and are more the places that you go to. And I think for me, Moria's the characters that I attach myself most to in Moria are things like, honestly, like the Dolbenview, because that was kind of, for me, seeing that being built was like a first time of oh wow, we're really doing this. And then places like the Flooded Deeps, which has just a very I think different dwarf feel than we'd ever really kind of previously built. Um, so, da, 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 da. So we'll keep going down through here. Can you go up to the secret pub that the keg can send you up to? Well, so I am running this on a live world right now, so I do not want to. I want to minimize the admin shenanigans that I do as I'm exploring here. So I'm going to respectfully decline going up to the secret pub just in the interest of making sure that things are still kosher. So Darkstar on Darkstar 1CZT says, are there any plans to continue next expansion with Durin the Seventh story to reclaim Khazad-dûm 2, since today's endgame content is about dwarves? So I will say, I think with fairly high confidence that at least for a little while we are done with dwarves. We culminated our storytelling in the Legacy of Durin and the Trial of the Dwarves with, that culmination happened at Gundabad. And where our eyes are turning elsewhere for our stories. This isn't to say we will never return to those places, because, I think 15 years ago, if you had said, okay, let's go back to the Trollshaws, or let's go back to the Shire, we probably wouldn't have thought to do that, because we are very focused on moving forward. And I think we wouldn't be opposed to going back to continuing to tell stories if we felt we had a good story to tell, or we had a story ready to tell in those places. Yeah, like this. So you're asking like what my favorite character is. Like, this is my favorite character right here. So Druid's Fire says, I would love to see more swift travel into the 21st Hall. I mean, I should be more readily able to get to it from Bree or Rivendell than Minas Tirith. Again, my long-term goals are to go through and do what I can to revise travel as I have time to where it's needed. We gave the Shire a little bit of love, and I think there's still more that we could do in the Shire if we had the time for it. But right now, where our focus is not specifically focusing on travel in existing areas. I am focused on building new areas and new places to go for right now. So Captain Kieran says, will there ever be an area in Eriador or so that would be level 50 to 60? I get probably not, since you want people to get their legendary items and go through Moria, but it would be nice to have those options for those who have been in there many times. We are not opposed to that at all. I think we both hear the feedback and the want and desire, especially, which has come up especially so since we started doing kind of more return tos in other zones. I think it is only a matter of time until we do something like that, but I could not begin to tell you when that would happen. So some trivia in here. When we originally built this space, these grates did not exist. Our original version of this space had no grates, and it was just pitfalls everywhere. And while we loved it, the idea of like all of these, just like you had to be a little bit more positionally careful as you were going through them. Uh, our early testing players did not appreciate it all that much. So that's why these grates are here. Um, they don't necessarily feel bad for the space, though I do miss like people falling down and dying. Was there one particular area or areas that were hardest to create in Moria from Runloft? Um, Honestly, I would have to say the Shadowy Abyss, the Foundations of Stone, was probably the most challenging to produce, and that's largely because we were pushing it in such an alien kind of direction, like literally alien. Um, we wanted to have some of that kind of Geigerish look and feel to the space as you were going through it, and it was not something that we'd ever done before. Like we were using like the Foundations of Stone was us exploring and figuring out like what are the nameless from a like cultural asset perspective. Like what does a nameless camp look like? What does a nameless, you know, just general nameless territory look like? We hadn't really delved into that much because like we didn't have very many nameless in our game up until that point, and here we are introducing this whole big area that was just all about the nameless beneath the earth. The things that were, pay no attention to that sea fighting, the things that were clawing and gnashing, at the Foundations of Stone where the Balrog came from. Like we had never like built that sort of thing before. So that was a like new challenge for us. Oh, that's right. Okay. I had completely forgotten about this portion of Moria. I'm like, New Silvertine City? I don't remember this at all. Yeah. This kind of shows how big Moria is, that there are parts of it that I can just completely forget about, even though I may have had a hand in building parts of it. Go up the stairs here. So there may be a bunch of doors. Oh, I don't like this at all. There may be a bunch of doors that you all see me kind of like walk up to and mouse over and then walk away from. A lot of the interiors we'll get to in in later portions of this. Right now, I'm just trying to make my way through as much of Moria as I can, and then we'll hit the dungeons after that. I'm already looking at the clock and it's like we're 45 minutes in and I've barely gone through 3 areas in Moria. Like this is why we made a bigger, we made this one a longer stream than usual. Let's see, so. Back around. Again, because I'm on a live world, things are taking me a little bit longer than usual, just because I don't want to rocket jump all over the place. That would certainly help speed things along, but it would also potentially freak out any random person that happened to be by to see the cloud of effects that happens when I rocket jump. So. Got to do this the old-fashioned way. This was, I think, probably one of my favorite POIs as well here in Moria. The this right here in the center, and it's something that like I think I was probably thinking a little bit about while I was building Bergbeam in Gundabad. Also love these. These mine track assets are some of my favorite assets in the game because they're just kind of fun to build with. You know, to do like weird, crazy, random layouts with. Ranator says, "Elf and safety gone mad in orc camps." Yeah. Well, the funny thing is, you know, you bring up like safety and whatnot. I think one of the funny things is as we were building Moria, we were constantly talking about all of the OSHA violations that the dwarves were having as they were building this, because and that's one honestly that had an effect on me as we were building Gundabad, where like I think in Gundabad you'll see a lot more in terms of rails on things. You know, there aren't as many like deadfalls that you can just walk off of, because I'm like, well, of course a dwarf would want to put up a a railing to keep from flying off of an edge. And I think maybe just it's a cultural difference between Gundabad and Moria, where the Gundabad dwarves are very concerned about keeping people from falling off of edges, whereas the dwarves of Moria could care less. This was a very fun area to design too, because again, like architecturally, it's very distinct from the rest of Moria. It's got a very different feel to it, from just the more curved architecture in the arches. It's a little bit less geometric. You've got things like stained glass all over the place in here. Not the best name for a hub, but I appreciate it over something that's ridiculously hard to pronounce in Dwarvish. I always have troubles with that whenever we do a dwarf area and the names of the areas are well researched but challenging to pronounce dwarf words. Alright, I'm seeing a request for a drink, so drink. So Mary Alice asks, could you connect Moria to the rest of the world, i.e. remove the loading screens, or is it located in completely different land blocks? It is off in its own little bubble, so it could not be connected without basically relocating it completely. And I think because it is a cave, it's somewhat more acceptable for it to have that teleport into it, because really, even though we built it like landscape, Moria is a dungeon. It is the biggest dungeon ever in Lord of the Rings, and probably one of the bigger dungeons ever in any game. When you think about the kind of technical definition of like a dungeon space. But because of its size, like it would not be an easy feat to move it into a place where it could like physically connect to the Dimraldale, for example. And on top of that, it would be physically impossible to connect it to anything in Eriador, because they exist on a completely different height map. I think in general with our landscape design, we like to minimize the amount of teleports while you are traversing landscape as much as possible. So typically over the open world, the only teleports you get is when you're going into a dungeon interior, or you are crossing over into another region, aka another height map. So that's why like you can take the road from Ered Luin all the way down to the Fords of Eisen, and then cross over into Rohan there. That teleport is because you are moving to a different height map. And unless we get a very, very significant change in how our technology works, um, that's always going to be the case between regions. All right, let's see. Let's catch up on some of these questions. So there's some people talking about the OSHA violations in Rivendell, but I mean, elves are eternal. That's okay. So, were there any plans at one point to have housing in Moria? I don't think we ever specifically had Moria housing plans. At least none that I was aware of. Again, it's a case of like in the future, maybe a housing neighborhood in Moria isn't a bad idea and we can do it. But it's not something that we have specifically any plans for, or had plans for at the time of building this. I think in some part because we were pretty content with the 3 neighborhoods, and I don't think that there was really, at the time anyways, very much interest on a higher level in producing more neighborhoods. I think the introduction of the premium neighborhoods kind of moves the needle on that a little bit, and there are definitely conversations that I've had with Reninian and others about like what I'd like to do next for housing, but those are plans that are also things that are not ready to be talked about. Keep going down through here. So I run into a stalactite while I'm looking at chat. There's some chat about Mythmoot, which I'm unfamiliar with, but I hope those that are going have a lot of fun. Let's see. Rivendell, what about those flets in Carascaladon? Oh, those flets in Carascaladon, or Galadon, they frustrate me to no end as well. I feel like they are just asking to have someone get pushed off. I mean, how many enemies does Galadriel have? Well, much fewer, since there aren't any railings to keep her from pushing people off of them. I kid. Galadriel would never do that. Or would she? So yeah, there are a couple of people asking about what's next for housing, and like I said, I'm not at a point to talk about what's next for housing. Outside of, I have very recently gone through the asset request list on the message boards and started building spreadsheets of all of those assets in there and their locations, so that at some point, once I have a little bit of free time, I can think about pulling together another bunch of housing items. I think one of the big things that I'd really love to do is I would like to build out things like stairs and floor items that you all could use to place on hooks. So that's like one of my big goals, and hopefully by the end of the year I can get to those for you. Because the decorative walls, like, I've been amazed by just how so many of you have like taken those and just run with it. Like, that's like seeing some of the things that you have done is just amazing, but then seeing that you're using them as stairs makes me sad, because I'm like, oh well, you guys, you all need stairs now. I feel bad that I'm making you use up so many hooks just to make a staircase. So the other thing that I want to investigate is making those decorative walls, and then also if I do stairs and floors, making those dyeable, so that you can kind of make them more closely match your houses. So let's see. Go down through here. Yao asked about a Lindleby housing area. Again, don't have anything to talk about as far as new housing areas at this point. Um, Kaifir asks, have you ever thought about integrating decoration into crafting any further? You mentioned wanting to create sets of housing items. What about allowing crafters to make these sets? A woodworker's table, 2 chairs, etc. I think it's still something that is on my kind of like list of things that I would love to do as I have time to do it, kind of thing. I think there's very little keeping us from making crafting items or making recipes for like compilation items outside of just having the physical time to do it. And there's only so many of us and only so much time. Um, let's see what other questions we have. How are additional housing hooks being added going? Still no progress on that. I think kind of where we're at right now, at least in terms of standard neighborhoods, it's going to be very hard to add more hooks to things and still keep it performant. Um, it whenever there have been people that report like they'll go into their house and they won't see anything, they won't have anything hooked, and some of that is it's a load issue. Um, we when you go and hook stuff, that's something that the server has to track and has to be aware of. Particularly outside, since that's what other people can see, it's even more important. But interiors are pretty heavy with all of the hooks and whatnot, and we want to try to be mindful of that. So that's where things like compilation items could be useful, where we can say like, oh well, a lot of people like using you know 1 hook for a table and 4 hooks for chairs. So why don't we just make a table and chair set? You won't be able to necessarily sit in the chair, but at least from a decorative perspective, it'll be there. And then that frees up additional hooks. That's why we were doing things like the hook consolidations. Making it so that you can use more hooks on more things, which is helpful and can help kind of push towards not necessarily giving you more hooks, but giving you more flexibility in the hooks that you have. Which way do I want to go? Do I want to go this way? No, I don't want to go that way because that's a very far way down. So yeah, I think that's kind of where we're leaning more towards. Like, we've got the consolidations done, which gives everyone a bit more flexibility, and if we can find the time to start kind of making items that are combined assets, basically, then that can help a lot too. Alright, yes, and that's the thing too, is like everyone is always going to always wish for more when it comes to housing, and while it would be great to be able to give more, the reality is it's expensive to do that. Alright, where am I now? I'm so lost. See, now I'm getting lost in here. Redhorn loads. Alright. Now I know where I am. Whee! I might do... This was kind of a fun area to build, too. Whee! And I think this is one of the areas that we've, like, have done, like, minor new additions to. You know, I think down here, for example, this is kind of a newer addition. Oh no, this was the, yeah, these were the crafting dungeons. Yeah. So that was a post-launch edition. That was one of my first forays into instance creation. So Kaifir asks, is there any reason why the Midsummer Reward, the Hobbit Dais, is yard only? A lot of yard items lately have been furniture items. Could it be made into a furniture item as well? You know, there's nothing specifically preventing that. So it could be. We would just need to, you know, kind of make a task for it and get it done. I love the glow up here, like just the spooky glowing eggs all over the place. The name, nah. Dasmordo asks, anyone who regularly traverses through Moria stairs on foot probably has never worried about missing Leg Bay. No, there are a lot of stairs in Moria. As one, like, with Deep's Grave, knowing how vertical it was, that's the reason why I added in the elevators kind of in the middle, like the lift in the middle of the region, was because, like, experiences in Moria of, like, wow, this is a lot of walking. Alright, Captain Kieran says, would there ever be a way to allow players to model and create house items, possibly for submission, to take the load off of you guys? I believe there are some complications to that kind of process. I could not speak specifically to it, but I would imagine that there would be kind of more like legal and compensation concerns about that sort of thing that kind of would make that sort of thing almost a little bit of a non-starter. I just from my own awareness of how things like volunteer programs in MMOs have gone, you know, in the past, that is why I have that thought in my mind about it. But I'm also not someone who is specifically involved with or associated with that sort of service or process that would be set up. That wouldn't be anything I would handle. So, all right. So was the Blind Leaper deed planned from the beginning or something added when people kept falling off places? I don't remember. I know the well was something that, the well into the Flooded Deeps from Durin's Way was something that we always were excited about and wanted to do. But, where do you send me? Yeah, we'll go. So we're kind of going like a roundabout way here in Moria. So we've been here in the Great Delving, and we kind of worked our way, you know, up into Durin's Way, down into Zelmelek, back over through the Silvertine Lodes, into the Waterworks, through the Flaming Deeps, into the back into Zelmelek, and now into the Red Hunter Lodes. Now we're in the Foundations of Stone. We're closing in. We're getting there. We're getting there. Whee! So yeah, like I said, this was a very, like, different kind of space for us than we usually build. This water was fun to make, because again, it kind of like took everything that we'd normally known for water and literally inverted it. And you see, I think one of our biggest POIs, the endless stair, that makes an appearance in several spaces throughout Moria. Again, in an attempt to sell the faux verticality of Moria by having kind of the endless stair be sort of a like anchor POI through a couple of different areas. Gotta love some creepy spiders. Fungal orcs and trolls. All right, so Burnley the Beloved says, will we ever have houses with windows we can see through? I know it's not going to happen, but it's on the wish list. So there are a couple of ways to think about that. And it was something that I was contemplating for Rohan, actually, was having interior windows that had skyboxes associated with them, and the idea being that you could hook an item to change what the appearance of the skybox would be. The problem that I ran into was, at least in terms of the implementation that I wanted to do, was a workload issue. For every house, I would need a unique skybox based off of the position that it was in, and then I would need unique variants of that skybox for every day file or every item that I wanted you to be able to change your house in. So it became a very quickly became a very heavy task to do. Now, if we had a system that allowed us to make like game cameras that you could look through, that would work, but we don't have that kind of system in place. We don't have kind of like a portal viewing system in our engine currently. So I feel like any sort of, able to look out your window feature would require new tech. So then on top of that, then you need to make sure that the property, instead of just the like far view of your house around you being loaded, you would then also need, while you are in your house, the server to know what the outside of your house looks like, which would then mean that the outside of your house has to be loaded while you are inside your house, which could also be a performance problem. So they're building something like that would have a lot of things that need to be answered and resolved before we could consider it. So let's go through a couple more of these questions. So Edith Eldora says, I discovered the Blind Leaper deed when I tried to jump onto the endless stairs from Jazargund instead of going around the long way. Yeah, and it's a long way to a short trip back to the defeat circle. So this is where we were starting to play a little bit with the alien themes here, the egg sacs. So I want to go, where do I want to go? I want to go to the Shadowed Cave, I think, because that's a newer addition to Moria as well. We don't often add many things to Moria, but the Shadowed Cave was a part of a new instance that came out not too long ago, and it was I think it was one of the first things that when I had come back from my hiatus that I got to build around a little bit. So Sneaky Squirrel says, "I've never played this game before, but looking for something new. Wouldn't you recommend?" Well, I would certainly recommend it, but I might be a little biased, by and large because I'm a developer on it. You've stumbled yourself into a developer stream for Lord of the Rings Online. Great classic MMO. I definitely enjoy it. It's something that even as a dev I still jump in and play and really enjoy, and it's kind of just a nice, like, great way for me to, like, end the day, just have some, like, nice uncomplicated fun game time. Plus I can play a Bjorning and, you know, heals and DPS and tank and all that good stuff all at the same time. I'm a fan. Captain Kieran says, "I've never been able to find the main road in the Foundations of Stone. I always jump from the res circle down near the dwarf camp, break my leg, and then swim in the water till I reach the other side." Yeah, I mean, I think there's not necessarily a road in here, which makes finding the main road a little challenging. Where am I going? I may just give up on going because I can't find where I want to go. I need to go north, I think. Proof, you know, if there's any better indictment of just how big this game is, it's when one of the designers on it gets lost trying to find his way around in it. Alright, I'm going to give up on that for right now. Because we've got more Moria to go look at. I think if I went that way I could get to it, but we do not have all afternoon, so I need to get on getting on. So are there any hidden areas in Moria that most don't know about? I don't think we have any specific, like, Easter eggy kind of things in Moria. You know, I think as the game gets older and as, you know, there's more and more content added to the upper end of it, I think it gets a little bit easier and easier to move past Moria and its instances. You know, pros and cons to that. Excuse me. Time for another drink. So there may certainly be pieces of content that you may never have played before that, you know, if you go back through and explore, you may discover, and those will be, like, new and fresh to you. Lyron says, "Were the Moria instances part of your world building, or is that a separate development team?" That's part of the world team. We build out the dungeon spaces that the instances go into. Usually it's, you know, unlike World where we have, like, all hands on deck for dungeons, it often ends up being something that is a single owner for. And oftentimes one designer will do a lot of the dungeon designs. So it'll be like one person will have their thumbprint on instances, and then everyone else kind of has their work on the landscape. You know, so for example, in Arid Mithrin, you know, I didn't do any of the landscape in Arid Mithrin. I was building all of the instances in Arid Mithrin. And we kind of, like, as we move into development, like, and move on to new things, our team kind of shuffles around a little bit, where it's like someone might be doing all of the dungeons and instances for an update, and then the next update they do landscape stuff, and someone else does all of the dungeons and instances. So it varies. Wrong way. This is going up to an instance. I remember this now. One of the trickiest things about a complex space like this is it's a lot harder to be like, oh, I see that point in the distance, and I'm just going to run there. You try to do that in a place like Moria, and you just end up running into dead ends and running in circles and all of that stuff. I'll say, like, one of the player keylight feature, you can see the shadow moving relative to my position here. I remember when we first introduced this, and I was running around in the Silver Team loads in just like playtesting on a character, and I like scared myself because I was running past a stalactite and it cast a shadow on the wall behind it, and I thought my character was getting attacked by like a cave claw or something, and I almost fell out of my seat because I wasn't expecting it. Alright, Yao asks, where's my Bjorning at the moment? Well, currently my Bjorning is going through Erd Luin and finishing up all of the deeds that I skipped in Erd Luin. He's level cap, but he's in, I'm currently in, like, you know, go through and revisit deed and reputation stuff now, while I wait for something new for him to do. But there is no shortage of regions and deeds for me to go back through. You know, I think at some point I might try, or I shouldn't say try. At some point I'll go through and, like, just for the fun of it, go through and solo things like Carndoom and Urgarth, and maybe even try soloing myself a Balrog at level cap. That might be fun. Let's see. Doomy1992 says, if SSG is ever looking for more world builders, could you do a competition that gives a little program demo to build something, and the best one gets higher prizes? And how does one get transferred to SSG when they get a job at Daybreak? So whenever we have a new design position available where we're hiring, that stuff is always posted on our hiring websites, our Daybreak's hiring websites. And they're usually pretty clear what company that the role is for. This is an impressive area too, by the way. The second hall is just like the POIs here, the points of interest here are amazing. If I do say though, like the one, if we were talking about how justifying things, justifying the lore for people being in here. I will say that from a world designer perspective, the extra stuff we had to build, thanks to the bridge of Khazad-dûm being broken, thanks to Gandalf and the Balrog's throwdown. The extra like space we had to build in order to justify that was like a little frustrating because like it's just across the way. It's just across the way. That's easy, right? But then we had to like build out north in order to have a way for players to get around, because we couldn't just like stop them here. So the idea being up here, if we're following through with our verticality stuff, the Bridge of Khazad-dûm is layered, would be technically above the Shadowy Abyss. and jumping down into it would let you fall into the shadowy abyss. Right now, you become defeated when you jump into it, but the idea was that that's kind of like what it is. Like, that's the verticality justification. So let's see. So yes, back to the hiring side of things. So anytime we have an opening, it's always posted on our site. Most positions will have something called a design test associated with it, where it's a take-home test, and what they are varies based off of the role that you're applying for. So, like a content design role might ask you to come up with, quest arcs or instance designs, whereas a game system role might have you have to like figure out different formulas and planning out things like DPS charts and whatnot. World design, I think mostly what we're looking for is a good portfolio more so than anything. Tests, especially since we work in proprietary tools, take-home tests aren't as useful for us. What we really want to do is see your work. We want to see what you can do, whether you're an artist or a designer. Like, we want to see the spaces you've built in other tools. Things like Unreal and Unity are amazing tool sets to let people kind of play and learn how to build. And I highly recommend anyone that's aspiring to do something like this to definitely spend some time with those tools. We've never done a contest style thing. As far as being hired at another Daybreak studio and transferring over to SSG, that is a question that is purely an HR question and not something that I have any answer or insight to. All right, let's see. So Epic Drewsdon says, is there not a hidden tavern in Moria only accessible from the keg? Yes, there is. I don't have a specific teleport location for it right now handy, and so the only way we could get to it was if I used magic admin chicanery, and because of the environment that I am currently doing this tour on, I am not going to be attempting that. So let's see. Can you show us the old Moria from Middle-earth Online days from Doomy 1992? Yes, I will be doing that in a little bit once we get through our tour here. So the idea that I'm going with is we'll do this. We'll go through some of the production spaces, the stuff that's live now. So I'm almost all the way done with Moria. Like, I kind of skipped. I skipped up here, but this is mostly cavey stuff, so I don't feel like we really need to look at it. But once I get to the end of the hall here, we're going to start taking a look at some of the dungeon spaces that were built for Moria, and boy, are there a lot of them. So I'm not probably going to go through all of those. Once we get through those, then there are a couple of prototype spaces or old spaces that aren't used anymore that we'll take a look at. I discovered the first hall. Alrighty. So we made it. We made it from one side of Moria to the other. Go us. Let's see, look at some more questions real quick, and then we will go in from there. Oh yeah, so the biggest difference between Middle-earth Online Moria and Lord of the Rings Online Moria is Middle-earth Online Moria was all dungeon space, as opposed to landscape space. And we'll take a look at that in a little bit, but first, let's start going through some of these dungeons. There are a couple that we're going to get to that I kind of look at like as sort of mission precursors. This always kind of bugged me. This is the castle set, and I don't know why we use this here. I think it's just mostly because of how flexible it is. But I never really liked that we used these in here. And I think we've done a lot over the years in terms of like building spaces that look dwarfy that don't have like out of place cell meshes that are being used. So yeah, I'm not going to spend too much time in here because this is basically what the dungeon looks like. It's a maze, so good for it. So Captain Kieran asks, how far along was the world built in Middle-earth Online before it was turned into Lotro? So a lot of Middle-earth Online was intended to be a very big open-world height map landscape. But I don't think the attention to detail I think it was intending to leverage like procedural stuff a lot more than we wanted to for Lotro. So there was certainly a lot of height map built. Oops, which way do I go this way? There was a lot of height map built and a lot of like little quick and easy town placement. But I wouldn't say that it was of the highest fidelity. And I think some of that too was because there wasn't really a world team in place for that. I think by and large the world was being built by content designers, so not only did they have to worry about their own content, they had to worry about building and placing things. And I think world design needs a little bit of a artistic eye in order to be really effective. And it's not something that everyone has, and that's okay, because everyone has their own things that they like gravitate towards and are strong at. But our team is very like specifically and intentionally focused on world design. So, all right, next. And Captain Kieran asks, was the reason it went from Mio to Lotro, was it because it was narrowed down in focus? I know very little about Mio and would love to know more. So I was still fairly newbie when Middle-earth turned into Lord of the Rings, and then I went over to work as lead artist on Asheron's Call. So I don't know the specifics behind ultimately why it changed names. I think some of it, I'm sure, was a like marketing intent. Like Lord of the Rings is a much more known name than Middle-earth, so you can garner more attention for the product with a name that is more familiar. And then I think on top of that, just the style of game it was not, at the time, was not really the kind of game that MMOs were kind of leaning into at the time. It's interesting that, all of these pupa are in very carefully placed cribs. These are some smart Grodbog here with their intentional furniture placement. Oh, I remember this grossness. This is one of the grossest places I think we've ever built. let's see. Crafting halls. One of the instances in Moria, I believe. Halls of crafting. One of the things that I do like about at least some of the dwarf spaces, the dwarf interior spaces, is I feel like that's the point where we really started pushing what we could do decoration-wise in interiors a little bit more, and making these interiors feel a bit more like filled. You know, because if anyone remembers from some of our like previous streams where we were going through earlier area door areas, like some of the dungeons, like going through in like Fornost, for example, you know, going through those instances there were very like simple, and I think we were trying to use the trying to think of the like complexity of the textures as adding to the complexity of the space, which it really doesn't. Drink. Alright, I'm gonna drink. I was telling Cordovan, one of the things that I would love to do, once we get through all of the casual strolls. So once we are through all of Rovanian, Gondor, Mordor, once we get through all the regions, I think one of the things I would love to do as a stroll is to go through and do more geographically focused ones. So things like, okay, this casual stroll is going to be, you know, casual stroll of the Brandywine, where we start at the beginning of the Brandywine and we go as far south as we can with it. Or, you know, casual stroll through the Greenway. You know, those sorts of things. You know, the Anduin, where we start at the headwaters and we go all the way to the end of the the river. Like, I think those, it's one thing to run around in the world and see how big each individual region is, but I think like showing off how connected the world is and talking about where it's connected and how it's all connected is really like really engrossing and interesting to me. So once we get through our regions, that's our next stop. Is we'll do casual strolls through that stuff. So let's take a look at a couple of these questions again. Oh, that glow in the hallways cool. I don't remember this. Yes, I was in the halls of crafting. So Captain Kieran says, you mentioned you left for quite a few years. How will those areas you were missing from like Gondor be covered? Will another Debbie who worked on them do it? I'll probably still be doing the tours of them. While I didn't build them, they're certainly kind of fresh in my mind. And, you know, I wasn't a part of building them, but I have played through them a few times now. So I have some frame of reference for it, and those particular streams might be a little bit more like us casually exploring it all together, than me having a ton of behind the scenes kind of conversation. So the spaces we're in right now, these were spaces that were some of my like first instances that I've ever built, with the idea being that they were meant to be supplemental to crafting people, and also to help support various deeds. So a lot of the creature types that appear in here, which can randomly appear, there's just random creature types throughout that spawn in when you load the instance, all have deeds associated with them. at the region level. So this was like a place, you know, in lieu of going to a monster camp, you could start up an instance, get yourself some crafting resources, and then also kind of, oops, I missed the walk up. Get some of your deeds knocked out at the same time too. But I think these were one of the spaces that I first started building where I was just like, I needed to feel like, and I wanted to feel like there was a volume of decoration to the space that felt like it was a lived-in space. You know, trying to make it feel like it had some good complexity to it, some variety to it. And you know, I was complaining about using the dungeon set for this that I did. The castle one's like, I'm a culprit of it just as much as everyone else was. I think if I were to rebuild these now, I would build them in a slightly different way. It's interesting going back into these places and going into Moria in general with the new lighting system in place, just being kind of such a, you know, I think in some parts it helps the mood of the space, and in some places that we've been, it isn't great for it because they're not lit well enough. I remember this being a fun space to build, though. It's just nice, like, kind of free-form building. Let's see, let's go down through some more questions. What are your thoughts on Gondor as a player? I went through there for the first time the past few months, and despite some frustration some players have with it, I found it gorgeous. I think Gondor looks great. From a player perspective, my biggest concern with Gondor is travel. There are a lot of hubs, and there doesn't seem to be enough travel points between them. And yes, real quick, I saw Yao's question about the Deep Claw. Yes, this is the first of my pet deep claws that I've hidden throughout the game. There are others. There are many, many others, but this was the first. I call him Smoochie. For those of you that are unfamiliar with the joke, so over the many years that I've worked on this project, starting in Moria, there have been deep claws that have been mysteriously appearing throughout. And, oh, well, that's nice. We'll ignore those floating things, and I'll just take a note for myself to fix that. But throughout Middle-earth, there are a number of like dungeon interiors and whatnot that have secret hidden deep claws in them, and this was the first place that was done. Oops. There's stuff that's invisible there too. This is an old dungeon, and there may be some things I need to fix in it. Alright, off to the next one. So let's see, question, Truthfully OP asks, how is the size of the layout determined? If you're asking about for a region or for a dungeon, often there are generally like metrics that we know we can build towards. Like we know how much time it takes us to build a certain space. And then we kind of look at the grander scheme of like, okay, you know, we need to build this many things for this update. So that means if we have to build this many things, this is how big the things can be. Um, so that's kind of how we determine it. We adjust the size of a space based off of how much we just have to do in general. We try not to overburden ourselves too much. I forgot how complex this space was. Another dungeon. Yeah, I think one of the things too, especially in dungeon spaces, which I think is a fun thing to do, is if you can build with looping in mind, that helps. And not necessarily looping in that you will always come back to the same spot, but looping in that like you can visit a space, you can start in a space and kind of get your bearings, and then at some later point in the dungeon, you can look back and see where you came from. It's a great tool for helping players understand their progress through a space. Alright, let's do another couple quick questions. Not related to Deep Claws, because everyone seems to love Deep Claws. Will there be any new raids or instances till the end of the year? I am not at liberty to talk about future content. There will be announcements regarding what we're working on doing at some point, but that's not coming from me. We're in Dark Brotherhood now. This was another one of those, like, we need to define what the nameless are, and how do we do that? What kinds of things do we use to show the nameless? And I think we leaned very heavy into kind of unsettling color schemes, particularly in lighting, to show that off. Go off to the different wings of the dungeon, which originally I don't think were wings. I think it was all one big space, but performance-wise we had to cut it up. We got Dark Delvings. From what I remember of Dark Delvings, this was one of the first times we really focused heavily on positional gameplay and environmental gameplay. Yeah, I don't think I'll be able to get much further here because there's logic usually associated with these barriers, and unfortunately, because I'm not in an instance, I won't be able to get through those portions. Go here. So Edith Laura says, the Moria interior spaces also have a very organic feel to them, as if you were inside a living creature, not a cave. Yeah, and I think textures go a very long way towards that kind of feeling. You know, textures can sell, like, this is effectively the same assets that, you know, we're using in something like Dark Brotherhood, but the texture that's being used on it tells a very different story. I love this little, like, vignette here. This just feels really good. I'm about halfway through the list of this dungeon. I may need to, of these dungeons, I may need to speed it up a little bit. This dungeon map is a little off. Feels like the dungeon space shifted just a little bit at some point and the map was never updated. Alrighty, let's go. Alright, so a little bit ago I talked about things that were kind of precursors to our mission system. So we had, in Moria, we had something that in development we called the Dwarven doors. And the idea behind them was they were very simple dungeon spaces that a designer, that we built out the shell for, then a designer could say, okay, I want to make a quick instance in this space, but I want it to be decoed for Grodbog. So we had these shells basically built, and then we could deco them out quickly as needed. And the idea being that they could be used for the shard instances. Super quick and easy for us to build. Since we already got most of the shell done, we didn't need to spend a ton of effort into a lot of very specific work to build the space. So there was 8 or 9 of them, I think. If the ones that didn't end up getting used for the shard instances did end up finding use in other ways. So we didn't have anything that I felt like went unused. Though these spaces ended up being much more simple in comparison to some of the others we built, because they were intended to really only be like 10-minute instances at most. So now we come into, I think, one of my favorite views in a dungeon space. The Falling Ruins, Zerthurk. Once we get out of the tunnel, we're able to see this here. Like, I really love, like, this here in the distance. You know, the buildings kind of built into the cliffs with the water just kind of like pouring and cascading. You're working your way across this ruined series of platforms. Like, there's certainly things we could have done to further sell this and to make it look better by requesting unique assets. But I think at the time that we built this, we were kind of past the window of asking for much as far as new assets goes. But I still just love this view. There's just something about it that feels like good and interesting to me. Alright, do a quick look at things again. Yao says, so now that we have Yondershire, what is your next project in terms of areas to develop in order to fill gaps or revamp an old area? When I know it, you'll know it? No, that's probably not the right answer. I don't have anything right now that is on my own personal direct bucket list. The stuff that I'm working on currently is very big and is taking up most of my attention. I still spend time to hang out with you all here to do this, but what I'm focused on right now is a very big project and a very big task. So, oh, those look like they're backward. No, they're just rendering weird. Okay. And those are doing the same too. Fun. So yeah, I don't have anything specifically that I can talk about regarding what my next things are. But I've got stuff on my plate. I wonder who came up with the idea of having lakes of Mountain Dew at the very bottom. I know Mountain Dew is vile, but still. So the water in the foundations of stone was kind of something that we came up with as a way to how do I say it? Like to further sell the grossness of it. And I think, you know, I don't know specifically how it came up, but we were just like playing around with like colors and whatnot. Like, how do we want to build the space? And we were already kind of going this like sickly purple motif, and we're like, well, like if we just flipped it and went with something green for water, like that would really like kind of further sell it, because like green and purple, there's definitely a certain like feel to those colors when they get put together. And we were looking just to like make things even more alien than they were before. Oh, the mirror halls. I remember doing this on a couple of characters not too long ago. I don't think I'll be able to go much further in here because of logic stuff, but we'll move on to the next one. I'll do peasant halls. It is really interesting, like running through these spaces and seeing how we built them, and then thinking about how we would go about building them now if we were to like redo them in a modern way. And I think we have, for a lot of spaces, moved away from very kind of simple cell mesh spaces, which is what this is. It's a cell mesh with a little bit of deco, and really trying to lean on the cell mesh for, you know, what everything looks like, and we end up building floating floating in space shells more often than not, where it's like we build the walls, we build the floors, we build the ceilings how we want them, as opposed to working within the confines of a cell mesh. And I think that helps us make much more like interesting and detailed spaces. Doesn't necessarily help us speed through our creation process. I think this was part of a fairly recent interior as well. Did I build this? I don't remember if I built this or not. I think I did. I think I must have built this one, because I'm the one. I like using the shadow volumes. I think those are one of my favorite new assets that we have, where they really are, all it is just a series of planes that get more and more opaque, or not even more and more opaque. It's just a series of planes that that when you look through them, they like kind of cause a shadow depth effect to appear. But I love using them because they help pull off that effect when I sometimes don't always want to rely on lighting. So maybe I was the one that built that. Alright, last dungeon space for us to look at is the Watcher space. This is something where we felt we wanted to do the Watcher, and we wanted to be a multi-stage thing. So there was a lot of work that went into the timing of things like this causeway and everything that was going on here. Maybe I'll go solo this with my Bjorning sometime too. People do love a good Watcher fight. This is another space where it's like if I had to do it over again, I might like try to add a little bit more complexity to some parts of it, at least in the non-playable areas. It just needs a little bit to break up the ground. I think it feels flat. All right. So we've got a few minutes left, so I wanted to jump into some of the prototypey or unreleased spaces that we have built. So I'll answer a couple questions and we'll jump right into that before we wrap up the stream. Again, thank you everyone for being here and for taking this very long tour with me. Squirrel asks, how do you go about adding new objects to an existing area like the Shadowed Chamber quests in Foundation of Stone? Those are mostly like opportunity finds. We look for places where there could be room for something, and then try our best to make it fit in. Sometimes that means we have to modify existing areas. Hopefully that answers that question. Hiking and Doldar says, if you could go back in time, what would you make any significant changes to Moria? If you mean like go back in time and work on it as it was, I don't think I would make very many changes outside of improving travel. The Steed network it needs a lot of love. So anyways, welcome to Moria. So this is a Middle-earth Online Moria. This is actually, I think, the first hall. And this is meant to be the exit out into Eregion. So the idea behind the original Moria was it was a much flatter space. The hallways were wider, but they were lower ceilings because dwarfs. Where am I? So as with any of these old spaces that have not been used in a while, there's a lot of fun issues with how the pieces connect. But the Moria space of old was a dungeon. It was not landscape. So yeah, this is what Moria could have looked like at one point years ago. Let's see. We'll see if I can get to one more room, and then we'll move on to the next thing. There we go. We're coming out into another... Oh, no, we're not. I thought we were, but we're not. All right. So now we'll go here. We've got a awesome dwarf tavern. This may be used in some form somewhere else, but the fact that it was a Breland loading screen says to me that it was not being used anywhere specifically. So Captain Kieran asks, what part of Moria took the longest to build? Maybe the second... No, not the second hall. Maps... Ravanian... Moria. I would probably guess Zellenmelek took the longest to build, just because of the sheer complexity of geometry in that space. Lots of tunnels and hallways and ups and downs and whatnot. So I don't remember specifically, but that would be my guess for the longest one. All right. Ooh. Alright, and then the last stop on our tour, since I'm going over a little bit, this was our prototype space for testing out dual height map, seeing what we could do to make a Moria that felt like Moria. We didn't have any of the new dwarf assets that we got when Moria became available, so this was all built using our old original Moria assets. So this was kind of our prototype proof of concept, like, can we make a great hall that feels like big and expansive but also feels like it's been built. And I think it was this sort of thing that like ended up being very successful. Oh look, it's a POI that I built when I was a production artist. It's always like, it always throws me off when stuff like this like shows up. Though granted, like, this is not a playable space, so. But yeah, so when we were preparing to build Moria, we knew we wanted to build it, but we needed a test space for it. So this ended up being our test space. Like, how do we build Moria? And it did well enough that we were greenlit to build Moria. I'd imagine too, like, how it looked when we presented the proof of concept was very different, just because of the way the lighting engine has changed. So yeah, that is where I think I will end the stream today. So let's take a look at the quick questions real quick, and then I will sign off. See if there's anything else. And rooms similar. I wonder if the menus in the map could be adjusted so they don't run down low. Alright, so Druid's Fire commented on the map panel stuff. Like, that's a UI thing that I'm not sure what would be required to fix that sort of thing. Definitely, if it's something that's problematic and we don't already have a bug on it, I highly recommend submitting a bug on it. But anyways, so I don't see any other questions. So thank you everyone for spending your afternoon or evenings, wherever you may be, with me, as we explored Moria. Our next stream will be somewhere in Rovanian. I will put a poll up on the message boards within the next couple of weeks, so that you all get to decide where in Rovanian we go next. There may be some regions that I consider off limits, because we've already explored through them. So things like Vales of Anduin, and Floodfells, and Elderslade, we may not do a tour through because we've already been them before, but we'll see. We may just do a second hit on those. We'll see what things look like. But anyways, thank you so much for everyone. If you haven't yet, our Midsummer Festival is going now, so feel free to jump in and join in the celebration. Check out our wedding-themed Minas Tirith that is no longer under the throes of war. We put a lot of great work into that over the last few years, and it's nice to be able to look at Minas Tirith and not have it be just completely devastated for a change. So, thank you everyone. Have a great day, have a great weekend, and we'll see you in the next stream.